Hey everybody, I'm Rick Beato. Adrian Belew, Steve Vai, Tony Levin, and Danny Carey will come together this fall for an extensive tour across North America performing repertoire from King Crimson's iconic 80s albums, Discipline, Beat, and Three of a Perfect Pair. The Beat Tour, as it's being called, will begin in San Jose, California this September. I had a chance to sit down with the band last week in Los Angeles. Here's my interview. Gentlemen, welcome. Okay. Tell me about how this project got started.
All right, we had a producer in the David Bowie band that we do, celebrating David Bowie. His name is Scroat. He and I were discussing the idea that, you know, the music of the 80s that I was a part of with King Crimson should be played again somehow. I had called Robert Fripp and said, do you realize that in 2 years, it's going to be the 40th anniversary of the first record we did, Discipline. And I think we should try to do something with that. And he declined eventually. We talked about it, but finally he declined. But he said to me, well, but if you want to do something with it and you want to drive it, go for it. And he would try to support it. So we started talking, and I said, well, first of all, you've got to find the right person to replace Robert, if that, you know, someone who can at least do what he does in their own way. And I said, the only one I can think of is Steve Vai. So I called Steve, and he was amazingly excited about the idea. And he said, I love that music, and da-da-da. And I thought, oh, wow, this is great then. So we started thinking, Scroat and I, where we go from here. Steve recommended someone who couldn't do it, eventually couldn't do it, and we never got to the bass player. We never got that far because of something called COVID. So then COVID happened, 2 years go by, call Steve back. Well, yeah, I'm still really excited, but I've got 18 months of touring booked ahead of me. Okay. So finally, long story short, we finally got to the point where it was possible to do this, and consequently, at that point, it was possible to have Tony Levin because he was no longer on tour with Peter Gabriel. And then I went to see Tool. They're old friends of mine, Danny Carey. And I said, there's no one I can't imagine anyone doing Bill Bruford better than him, because I knew his background. He said the same thing, that the Discipline album really was a changing point musically in his life. And then we had it, and then it was just down to putting it all together with the production team. Miles Copeland is at the head of that, and we have a guy named Steve O'Glendenning from London. So nice team of people put together, ready to go. Our booking agent was just here telling us it's a go. Mm-hmm. Fortunate for us, because it was just announced all over the internet.
Okay, so Tony, you joined King Crimson that year, right? In 1981 for the Discipline record. Both of you guys. That was your first record. So those three records have the three primary colors, Discipline and Beat, and Three of a Perfect Pair. Now, you haven't played this music since how long? How long would it be?
It does come up in a few bands we play in different versions of it, and probably maybe all of us. So I haven't played most of it in a long time.
Some of it you have played, though.
Sure. Not to mention with King Crimson, but some of it with King Crimson, some of it in other bands. I've even done jazz versions of some of it in a jazz band I'm in, but most of it I have not played in a really long time.
Okay, so Danny, what about, have you played through the songs, like as a kid? Did you play to these records?
I played to them, in my parents' attic or something, but I've never performed them live, really, to speak of, other than sitting in with Adrian. And
actually, we have played Frame by Frame and Thala and Gingy
that's right.
quite a few times when we sat in.
Trio thing, maybe, yeah. And the Stickmen were on that one run, weren't they?
Yeah.
So we all... Like, we would play, and then you guys would play, and then I think at the end we'd all get together and have a crazy jam on some cool Crimson songs.
This is the man who's not played this music at all, right here.
No pressure.
I've certainly oogled at it quite often.
Oogled or Googled?
Well, both. Both. But my history is when I was young, I was exposed to Robert Fripp on Exposure. And I knew that there was something going on there that was different. You know, one thing is different than the others. And I just was attracted to his musical mind and his creativity. I hardly played the guitar, you know, so long ago. So I kind of followed through the years, and I loved the old King Crimson stuff. In the 80s, when those 3 records came out, they were really monoliths because they, especially for someone like myself, because they really showcased a complexity that scratches a particular itch that I have that nothing else really reaches, but it's accessible. And having Adrian in that band at that time and Tony was a masterstroke, because there's a beautiful balance of accessibility. You don't have to be a muso, you know, but the parts that they were contributing were just brilliant, you know, just beautiful. And I would listen deeply to the music, and I'd hear what's going on, you know, because I was very interested in that kind of stuff,
right?
You know, and I'd worked with Frank, and
yes,
and which was my first exposure to Adrian.
Both you guys,
yeah, absolutely. You know, I'd watch Baby Snakes over and over and over, you know, and
it's 3 hours long.
I know, and I watched it over and over and over.
I'm guilty too.
Yeah, and just really. Kind of from a distance followed everybody through the years after that, but those records were like little gems, you know. Never did I ever think I would be performing the stuff. And when Adrian first called, the first thing that went through my mind is, I didn't know he was actually even referring to the King Crimson stuff. I'm saying this is the first minute, you know.
Right.
And I'm thinking, oh wow, Adrian Belew, Steve Vai. I think there's something really great there. You know, I think we can get into some, because we're kind of different, but we kind of have an attraction to the absurd, you know, on the guitar is something, you know, because
I'm attracted to you because you're absurd.
That makes all
Nothing
you
to
and
do
all
with the
my
guitar.
fans. But then as soon as it dawned on me that he was referring to the King Crimson music, I just went, and you know, a shock went through me, because the first thing I thought was, how does Robert feel about this?
Right.
He's like a scientist, but it's not just his picking technique. You know, it's his musical mind, his the way that he approaches time signatures and polymeter stuff. The way that these guys do all that was so attractive to me. But the picking technique, that's like you know, something that is personal, you know, to him, and he perfected it, you know. So I started listening to the music, and I'm thinking, I go, okay, all right, you know, okay, all right. And then I got the songbook. This songbook. It's a beautifully transcribed manuscript book of those
Amazing.
3 records. It's very specific, because, you know, Crimson fans are fiercely loyal, and every little you know, thing, and
every
especially
nuance.
Fripp fans and Adrian fans, they can get every little thing, and what Tony does, you know. So this was a little Bible, and I started looking at it.
It's not that little, actually,
It's a
Steve.
big Bible. Yeah, it's like a big Bible. I've been in this kind of a situation, you know, in that when I joined Alcatraz, I had to play Yngwie music, and of course I don't play like him. But I did my best to honor the music and to bring his fans something that, you know. And when I joined Dave Roth's band, you know, that was the voice that had Edward behind it that everybody knew. So I just knew that I had to put my best foot forward. I'm not Edward, you know, I don't play like that, but I really loved the music, and I could do it in a particular way. So I did my best with that to honor his fans, that music. And with this, it's the same thing. You know, there's stuff that, you know, that's, you know, that is integral. And that the thing I love about it also, it's going to require me to hunker down and shed, you know, like really focus on trying to develop some kind of technique that can cover some of the stuff he was doing. And some stuff will have to be, you know, merged into what Steve might do, you know. But it's such beautiful music. I'm listening to this, and after I'm getting over the shock, I'm going, oh my goodness, this stuff is just, it's magnificent to play.
When you guys did that record, the Discipline record, it was 81. King Crimson hadn't put out a record in 7 years, right? So, and you weren't even going to call it a Crimson record at the time. Is that correct?
It was originally called by Robert Discipline.
Discipline,
That was
okay.
the original name of the band.
How did you make the decision to make it a King Crimson record?
I arrived in England with Talking Heads in 1980, doing that Remain in Light tour. And the next morning, I got a call from Robert. He woke me up and said, me and Bill Rupert would like to start a band with you. We auditioned, much later, we auditioned 30 bass players, and obviously Tony was the choice for sure. But after that, we started rehearsing, and I started playing, trying to play like Robert's style so we could have the interlocking guitar. I would do that about 4 hours a day, every day with Robert. And then we started working on ideas to turn into material, and Bill and Tony were working. And eventually, I say 3 or 4 weeks in, we were starting to sound like something. But Tony and I, both being Americans, we were kind of like, Discipline, I don't know, it's kind of a unfriendly name to us, And so there was a little bit of talk over breakfast and stuff about the name. And then one time Robert arrived and said, whatever we call this band, its spirit is King Crimson. And I believe I said, well, let's call it King Crimson. Because I was a big, huge fan of all the old stuff, that I knew it very well. And I knew that King Crimson, for at least the musicians in the world, it was high-level stuff.
Oh, yeah.
And so what I did is I essentially threw myself into the fire.
So, Tony, you did the Double Fantasy record in 1980, didn't you?
Yes.
So this is just before that.
Yeah, and I joined the band, met these, I knew Robert because we had toured together with Peter Gabriel, and I had played on that Exposure album of his, loved his music. And I didn't know I was auditioning Adrian. I thought, we're getting together to rehearse this new band. That's typical that nobody quite spelled it out to me. And I was struck, of course, by the amazing musicianship and the uniqueness of each player. And we played, I don't remember really much of what we played, but one of them was an older King Crimson piece that I didn't know. I didn't really know any King Crimson material. And I guess I learned it quick enough and without much fuss that I wasn't booted out the door.
I can tell you what you played.
Okay.
Because they had a thing that they tried to see if anyone could play.
Really?
And I believe it's what you eventually did play on Discipline, the song Discipline.
Oh.
And it was in 17. It went da 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 dum dum da 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 dum dum da 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 dum. And you picked it up like this, playing it on your stick, and everybody looked at each other like, "Oh, wow!" First of all, we hadn't seen
it lies really well on the stick, and not on the bass, but on the. So I had an
First
advantage.
of all, we'd never seen anyone play a stick, so we were absolutely fascinated by that. But then he was right in there with Bill, and I'm sure Robert was grinning ear to ear because I think he already knew that of the 30 guys that had signed up, Tony would be the guy.
Yeah, I kind of synced up with Bill. He played ba-ba, ba-ba-ba, and I could play that. And soon after, we were the band Discipline, and I agreed with Adrian that it just doesn't have a good connotation to us Americans. I think I realized that checking into
Americans
a
we're not disciplined at the time.
It just has a negative connotation, or it can.
Yeah.
And I was checking into one hotel, and the woman at the desk said, "Oh, you're in a band. What's the name of the band?" And I said, "Discipline." and I just, really, honestly, I knew I didn't really want to spend the next 5 years saying that.
That doesn't quite work.
Yeah.
Well, that's a good test.
Yeah, but I wasn't the one to say, "Hey, let's call this King Crimson." Adrian took over that. Yeah, it was quite a time. I don't think very often back that far. But
I kind of knew Robert enough by that point, even because we worked every day, that maybe that was his attention and he just wanted someone to say it so he wouldn't have to say it necessarily.
Can you imagine that we're sitting here today because some woman in a holiday?
because if we continued as Discipline, who knows? Would we have sold 100 records? We don't know.
That's true, too.
Yeah.
So, Danny, your background with playing music, progressive music, you started when you were a kid.
Yeah, all the prog records.
All
I
the
grew
prog
up
records,
listening
right?
to Yes and Genesis and Crimson. Like I think the first Crimson record I bought was Starless and Bible Black. That was struck me, and then I went and got Larks, even though I think the order was reversed maybe on that. But yeah, just it had a huge impact on me. All that stuff did. The drumming is always really interesting on the prog stuff compared to pop music. So
when you're hearing all this stuff to go pick out the parts, and you've got all these intricate polyrhythms going on with the guitars, it must be difficult to actually pick out exactly what's going on.
Well, especially on a tune like Discipline that you were talking about, because that's all the articulation is so tight, it's all hitting together. It's hard to tell if Bill's riding on a boo bam or on the log drum thing or whatever. You just kind of hear the attacks and the articulation. That's the beauty of it. It's a real communal kind of song or something, so everything's real evenly mixed, so it's kind of hard to identify. So I was relieved when I found out there was nice transcriptions of all this stuff. I was like, oh, I'm going to be needing that. But,
Hope they're right. Hope they're not wrong.
That's kind of scary,
When we finally went into the studio and started recording, one of the first things we learned is that we both used jazz chorus amps.
Okay.
And they both had stereo chorusing.
Yeah.
So when you have stereo chorusing going with 2 amps and you're both playing or something like that, it doesn't work actually when you record it.
Interesting.
Because the chorusing is just, you just sound completely out of tune.
Yeah.
So then we had, maybe it was the engineer, maybe it was the producer who said, well, why don't you turn off one of the chorusing and we'll use the chorusing later on the second one. Because ideally that, the parts are supposed to sit together, but with that actual stereo chorusing, they just sounded more out of tune than anything.
Wow, that's
we hadn't realized that.
I know you had on both the first 2 records, the Roland GR300 guitar synthesizer, which you're playing a lot of lead lines on, but I don't think you used it on the 3rd record at all.
Well, I had moved on. Gear was coming. New gear.
So what kind of gear would you have been using back then?
By the 3rd record, I wish I knew, because it all went by so fast. But yeah, the GR300, Steve and I have been talking about that, because it is really a big part of that. It was the 2nd guitar synthesizer ever put out. The first one was a Real Dog. We tried it with Frank Zappa.
Did not work.
It was a big keyboard. You had a big chord, and Frank immediately said, "Get that thing out of here." But I went to Japan with Talking Heads, and they didn't have it over here in America. And they presented me with one, and I took it home. It had a guitar too, but you didn't have to have that guitar. So anyway, I went back, and then Robert got one too.
Yeah.
And so I always say one of the amazing things about those records right off the bat is the instrumentation. You've got a stick no one's ever heard, really.
That's one of the things I ever.
Bill has got all these Simmons electronic drum sounds going on within a kit, and he was limited to not having a hi-hat by Robert. Robert said no hi-hat. So he had these boom bam things, these big long tubes, and then there's me and Robert with guitar synthesizers no one had heard. So, that was
really, the first year, the first record, 81, that was the first year that they had those GR300s out.
Yeah.
And you guys did not use the guitars?
I brought the first one back to the United States, I think. I swear. Yeah. I think I did. Didn't get to use it at all until King Crimson.
I remember those things actually were the first ones that actually tracked well.
I think the SDS-5, that was the year they came up to the Simmons, the first really good Simmons brain, too.
Yeah, so all this new technology was being invented back then. And then you have the stick that you're playing on the record. So it's really the sounds right off the bat. The first track on Discipline, you have this. It's like, what is that?
Yeah, exactly.
These animal sounds. Like, how's he getting these sounds?
The animal sounds that's a whole different thing.
Yeah, how were you getting those? I mean, what other things were you using to get these crazy sounds?
Okay, well, my guitar rig really was very simple back then.
Okay.
I hadn't been able to get that far. I'd been playing with David Bowie, and when I showed up with the gear that I have from playing with Frank, the 2 electronic geniuses they had laughed at me. And they said, no, we're going to build you something. So I had 3 or 4 pedals, and then they made me a thing that connected to the pedals, which were back here behind me. They set in the top of my amp case, and it Thing came down and it just said 7 buttons, on, off, 7 buttons. One of them was for muting the sound, and one was whatever I put in line number 1. Okay, so that might be a flanger. Then there's this, and then there's that. And I had a compressor that I always used on, and that was it. I had just a few. When I did the Remaining Light record too, which was previous to King Crimson.
Yeah.
Same thing, same setup. So it was only really when we got going in King Crimson that, I'll be honest, all the manufacturers went, oh boy, let's give these guys, they'll do something. Nice. And they just started pouring things on us.
The one thing Crimson always did, for me, I think for all of us, it gave us a lot of R&D time, a lot of time rehearsing. Even after the pieces, to try out, well, what if I tried this idea? It's crazy, and a week later you'd say, yeah, that was crazy, I won't do that. And then you try something else, and when all the guys are doing that, the chemistry can be pretty worthwhile.
Steve, what were you using? What was your guitar rig with Zappa at the time?
Well, I had spent precious little time on my rigs because I was just at a college, high school even, when I moved to California and started working with Frank. And so I was kind of referring to him to see what kind of stuff he would use. Because really, for me, it was like, plug me in, I just need to be heard. I got to hear myself. I just hadn't the budget. Having a stack was like a fantasy. It was like, okay, all right, I can buy strings, And
if I don't break them.
If I don't break them. Yeah. And then when they'd break, I'd actually have to fix them. But with Frank, I started to get more introduced to some quality amplifiers. Acoustic was one of them back in the day. I just never resonated with a Marshall, back at those periods. Frank had Marshalls also.
Yep.
I tried in the beginning with Frank, but I think I did use a Marshalls for one of the tours I did, but it just wasn't the kind of friendly tone that I was looking for. So I never really gave much attention to looking for gear. And then eventually, Carvin came into the picture because of Frank, you know.
Yep. He had an endorsement.
He had an endorsement with them, so they actually endorsed me. So this was way back.
Yeah.
Which was, I finally had a stack, and it was just so beautiful. But I did spend a little time in other kinds of amplification at that time. But then once new gear started to come out in the development of it, I started to get into it, like with Dave Roth, which there was I believe it was a Roland. It was actually the guitar itself.
Yeah.
It was a GR something.
700.
That was it, 700?
Yeah, that's right.
That was pretty late.
That was
in the 80s when I was in the Bears. I was using but I didn't use the guitar again, the big Behemoth guitar.
Yeah, that was the first thing that I had that resembled any kind of synthesizer sound.
Yeah.
But I could never, and then after that, companies would, want me to try their new gear, but I could never find anything that tracked the way I played, or that I could figure out how to play cleanly enough, to where it made sense for me.
See, for me, that was that way too, but I wasn't nearly the fast-playing guitar player. I never really tried to be a fast guitar player. So what I did is instead, I made it so the things I played were meant not to be played fast. Like I would swell notes and do cloudy things and stuff like that. And I wanted to go back one step, because when I was with Frank, I heard some guy who had, at a party I went to, they took me to a party, and it was just, suddenly heard this amp really quietly, and I walked over and was listening. This guy was just playing nothing. It was the Jazz Chorus amp that we just mentioned. And I went back to Frank and told him about it. He had him bring over 2 Jazz Chorus amps. He didn't want one, and I wanted it. That became my amp, and it's that amp that really did a lot of the crazy sounds, because I could get it to feedback and oscillate, and do things like that.
They were beautiful amps. I had one of those, and that was one of my first good sounding amps for that
totally
spatial.
Clean, though.
Totally clean,
Very
but the
clean.
spatialness of it, because it had
It was
built-in.
solid state.
Yeah.
Wasn't no tubes.
Yeah, yeah, and but then once the technology started getting more refined, I started using it more, and I have it on some records. But for for this gig,
Right.
once I started listening to the music, I was very excited about because I wanted to revisit the electronic guitar atmosphere. You know, I was waiting for a good excuse. And once I started listening to this music, I said, okay, now it's good time. So we called, Roland, and they have the newest system, like the numbers. Hey, Doug.
Yeah, GM 800.
Okay, sorry about that.
Thank you, Doug.
Thank you, Doug. Okay. So Doug and I, my tech, we started to look into, because I knew I needed something that I had to get into those sounds. I mean, some of the things that Robert does is just so beautiful.
Yeah.
With the
GR300.
with the GR300.
Yeah.
You know,
very
but
first.
I can't go back to even finding one of those.
No, they're
you
hard to
know.
find.
I
I
have,
have
one.
mine.
You know, I
But
have
you can't
one
have it
someplace.
because I'm going to have to use it on this tour.
But I think that I'm going to first explore ways to build, because a lot of them you could pass them on to the next unit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Roland is always making such, good stuff for that.
So it is a factor right now as we sit here today. We don't rehearse for a few more months. In my mind, I'm trying to figure out how am I going to get those sounds now. I don't use that gear at all. And you can't take a GR300 and just plug a guitar
No.
or anything. It's got a big, huge
That like
D
100 pin connector, whatever it is.
Giant
Yeah.
thing, So I'm concerned. But now that he's told me about the new Roland, I'm going to dig into it too and see if I can get close to those sounds because it was a hexaphonic pickup.
That's right. Every string has a pickup.
Yeah.
And it gives it a real clarity. You can hear every individual string on it.
Now see, my Parker Fly has that, but I don't know how to get from that pickup into that item. So I'm going to have to figure that one out. And I'm also even been thinking about whether or not to bring the jazz chorus so I can go woo, 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 like I used to.
Oh, I think you should.
Yeah, I mean,
need
that
that.
was one of my favorite things
Well,
back
just
then. If I
saying,
couldn't
woo, woo,
think
woo.
of something to play, I'd just go back to my amp and do that,
Well, you should have I do that with
In
the
fact,
whammy bar.
there is a funny thing that we did this one song on beat, and we didn't have a lot of material on beat. We had to develop it rather quickly, and there was one called The Howler. And in The Howler, there was a place for a solo. Robert didn't want a solo, and I was like, oh, golly, I don't know what to play. I leaned my guitar in front of the amp, turned on the chorusing and the fuzz tone, and it started to go, and that's the solo. I actually didn't play.
That's incredible.
And then he was hired by Nine Inch Nails.
Tony, what was your rig back then?
4-string bass,
Yep.
Music Man, like I use now, although
Yep.
I have a 5-string finally. And the Chaplin stick, which has a bass side and a guitar side. However, I put them both through a whole lot of pedals. In fact, one day we counted and I had the most pedals of anyone in the band, which was an embarrassing 31 pedals.
31.
I don't remember what they did.
A man after my own heart.
Oh my gosh.
I will not be touring with 31 pedals this time. I'll probably have one multi-unit. I'm not sure which yet. But I use a lot of pedals. Most of the time, not so, but sometimes just having it there to kick in when things get weird was good. We also improvised a whole lot, especially on one of the albums. I forget, was it Three of a Perfect Pair? It was
Three of a Perfect
Yes.
Pair.
Definitely
Yeah,
has
just
a lot of
plain-
improvisation on it.
Well, big fat bass notes, not appropriate for
And
that.
by that point, you had added the Moog. I think it was a Moog.
I
you
played a lot of
little
synth, and I will on
bass
this
stuff.
tour.
Nice.
Yeah.
Fabulous sounding things.
I
So-
think I have the same synth.
So
Yeah.
Danny, what would be your drum kit? I know you have with Tool, you have this mega kit and everything, but a kit for this might be what?
Well, I'll probably try to use a lot of the sources like that Bill did at the time, just because it's kind of a necessity for those songs.
Yeah.
So I'll have my electronic pads. There's kind of an updated version of a Simmons kit that I actually use with Tool.
Yeah.
It's a program called Battery that I can just load
Battery.
all the
You use battery
sampling.
4. Is that the one you use?
Yeah,
or
whatever the
something like
most
that? Whatever
recent
battery
version
5.
is. Yeah. I actually got Bill's boobams, the acrylic ones. They're dragon drums, actually. I got those from a guy over in England, had a drum store, and he was selling off a bunch of Bill's stuff, so I purchased those. So I'll have at least a few of them. I think he had 5 or 6 of them or something, so
That's
I'm going to try to
nice
emulate
memory.
those ride patterns and stuff on those, and then maybe, then other than that, just some acoustic things. A roto-tom, of course.
Roto-toms,
I've been using a roto for ages. And I used to have a whole set of them that I played on, but one's sufficient for this, I think, And then a couple of toms, like acoustic toms, and a usual array of cymbals.
At the time that I was asking him if he could do this, I sold him a drum kit I had of Bill Bruford's. The yellow kit from the 90s band.
Wow.
It was gifted to me by someone who won it in a contest. Todd Harrington is his name. He won it 17 years ago. 12,000 people entered. He won the kit.
Incredible.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
And he wanted his son to play it. Son never took interest in it. And gradually he started coming to our band camp that we have every year. And got to be good friends. And one day he called me up and said, "I've got Bill Bruford's drum kit," and told me all about how it happened. "I'd like to drive it to you. Could we have dinner?" I said, "Well, I think we'd have dinner, yeah." So he has it now because, he needs it more than I do.
I'd use it on this tour, but it's a Tama kit, and I'm a sonar guy, so it'd be
There you go.
kind of a no-no, but we'll see. Yeah.
Okay, so how do you go about, Steve? So you're basically Robert Fripp for this, right? These are, you're your version, Steve Vai's version
Any
of Robert
resemblance
Fripp.
is purely coincidental.
Okay, so how do you go about starting to put together all these parts? There's a lot of intricate
the
things. So
thing
you're used to
about-
playing intricate stuff.
Yeah, but intricate stuff for the sake of being intricate is never interesting. You lose the retention. But Robert's stuff, it oddly falls beautifully on the guitar. Like when I was with Frank, I had a picking style. I had changed my whole style in about 88 or something. But with Frank, I had a picking style that can pick out all these composed notes that just don't belong on the guitar. But Robert's stuff, it fits beautifully. It's like a guitar orchestration. The way that it's performed is unique to him. I mean, as I work on it, I think I can get this. I can get this. But the thing about Robert is his guitar playing is relentless.
Yes.
It's relentless. It doesn't let up. and it's like your muscles go, brr, 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 and it just doesn't let up. And I don't know how he does it. He's a freak of nature, man. His sense of timing, his sense of, like I say, there's no real polyrhythms. It's all polymetric.
Yes, right.
It's and I love that. And that, I just love that atmosphere that it creates and, holding tight to it and then when the beautiful melody comes on top of it, it brings you right. It brings it right to your living room. It just makes it so beautiful and accessible. But lucky that there's that book, because you can't really hear because their tones are so similar.
Yeah.
And it changes like 1/8 note here.
Right.
It'll go like Robert will play something in 13. But then he'll do a bar of 12, and then good luck, So, or something like, So I've only really looked at it and fingered through it right now. I'm going to be, putting the screws to it. Luckily, I have that book, and I have a pretty good sense of that kind of polymetric thing. But
And you have me.
And I have you, and we're gonna.
I know some of it, but not Robert's parts, of course.
Yeah. I thought you were gonna play frame by frame.
Yeah.
And that's the thing about some of it. It's difficult, but but that's not the difficult part.
So the
difficult part is that it's relentless.
On frame by frame, for example,
Yes.
you play the more the held chord parts. Some
That's
during
in
the singing.
That's in the parts where it's an instrumental.
Yeah.
Da, da, da.
Right.
I wanted to play that against Robert's going da 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 da, the relentless part.
Yeah.
But to start it and where the vocal is, it's a line in 7 da 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 da.
Right, and you're doing that.
I started with Robert.
Yep.
And what Robert does is, if you consider it 2 7s, so it's 14
He plays
notes.
a bar of 6.
Yeah.
So he drops off the last note.
I noticed
that he goes da 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 da. And he does that long enough that it gradually comes back around and joins mine.
Right.
And that's where we change chords.
Right.
Yeah.
So these guys had to figure out how to make their parts do that too.
Yeah.
What could possibly go wrong?
Yeah.
Playing that live.
It's so beautiful. It's miraculous
Yeah.
music.
The real trick for me was once I got that in my body, as we call it, sing something over that. Write a melody and words and sing it over that and be the front man and play that at the same time, which I thought, well, okay, this is like you're feeling. This is the challenge in front of me. I can't go home. I've got to do this.
You got to do it. You got to figure it out.
So,
I always thought you were a great singer. I mean, you have such a beautiful voice. And going back and listening to those records, to me, when I heard Jeff Buckley, it seemed I was like, I wonder if Jeff Buckley was influenced by you, because you have this tone to your voice, a pure bell-like tone that in registers of his singing, to me, sounded like you.
I never met Jeff, unfortunately, but someone told me that he said that.
Yeah.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah.
I played in a
Really?
country band with Jeff.
Yeah.
Really?
You say that again?
I played in a country band with
No
Jeff
way.
Buckley when he was going to
really?
MI or something. Yeah, it's pretty funny. Wasn't real long lived.
Now the nuggets are
I felt
coming
lucky
out.
to play with the guy. He was really gifted, Yeah, he was a great guy.
What would rehearsals be like then with this? Like, how do you go and get ready to rehearse? Will you be playing X amount of songs from Discipline, X amount of songs from Beat? Do you know exactly kind of what you guys are going to play yet?
Well, I've been putting together a kind of a list, and it'll be changed, of course. But I started with the ones that I felt like were kind of essentials that fans would want, and throw in a couple that they probably would not expect. And now I have that list, we're sharing it, but I don't know what the timing of it is, so I don't know how much more we have. But it doesn't have much of the big, meaty instrumental stuff. It's more the songs, because that's what this tour was supposed to be, to sort of highlight the song stuff. But I think now we have to add in the Robert part, basically.
Yes.
The heavy duty stuff. And I don't know what that'll be, so we're gonna think of that.
On 3 of A Perfect Pair, it feels like there's more song structure on half the record.
Yeah.
So it's like you have half the record as a kind of improvisational
Yeah, that was
record.
Robert's idea. Once we had realized what we had,
Yeah.
he said, why don't we put the improvised, we called it industrial,
Okay.
over here, and Aid's songs over here. And that's pretty much how it fell.
What is the difference between progressive rock and, let's say, fusion of the 70s? And,
I feel like the fusion stuff had a lot more room for improvisation. It's more like playing standards. Most of the fusion tunes I played, and they have the head and then solo over the changes or whatever. Where prog rock, to me, was always really articulate arrangements, and it's more composed, than it's more set in stone, I think.
I agree with you. However,
anyway.
there is an overlap,
One
though.
thing that separated King Crimson of the 80s from either of those things is the fact that we were never play anything in unison. You never heard us play, da-da-da-da-da, that's not, but I'm saying like in a jazz band, they'll play lines in unison, jazz
Have a
fusion.
head or whatever,
They'll
yeah.
have a head,
Yeah.
We never did that. We started right in, everybody's doing something completely different from each other. And I think that's a big difference musically in why that music has what it has. Even Frank Zappa, love him so much, he would have parts where people were playing, together.
Yeah.
Same lines, but we weren't allowed to do that in King Crimson.
And that was a conscious thing.
It was a conscious thing, and I personally really enjoyed that because I thought it really did separate us. You never would go, oh, there's that, you know, that we've heard in every other band.
It
One of the
definitely
beautiful
separated
things
us,
about
certainly.
that also is that those King Crimson records is when you're listening to them, it's 4 guys.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it's not like overproduced, but it sounds like, I mean, there's a couple of overdubs, you know.
Rarely. That was
Rarely,
another
but-
thing it's another thing Robert wanted. We write the songs to be a 4-piece, we record them that way, and we go
I
and
know,
play
amazing.
them live that
And they
way.
stand up.
Yes.
They stand
And
up
what
live.
we would do, another thing we always had to do was we would write to get the arrangements and start rehearsing. Then we'd go out and play a short little tour before
Secret
we'd
tour.
finish the songs.
Which you can't do anymore.
No, we couldn't
Before
then.
we
had
would
to be
finish the
sneaky.
songs, we would do that. We'd go test drive this material.
Yeah.
Then we'd go back and we'd finish it out, and then we'd finally record. That
Also-
worked almost the whole way through my tenure of 30
Also, in the
years.
studio, many bands that I've been in do multiple takes of the same piece,
Yeah.
so you get it right.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, we would do one take, and then the next piece, and then the next piece.
Yeah.
Didn't have it, the next day we'll do it again, but
Yeah.
like a live show.
Yeah.
We didn't do multiple, maybe sometimes we did
Oh,
two.
that's interesting. I
Yeah.
don't know.
There were rarely
We wanted
any
the
overdubs.
live feel.
That's great.
Yeah.
Wow, see, all these things go into the overall makeup of that magic that those records are.
I'll give you a really good example. We did Monte Kudasai, which is a beautiful guitar piece by Robert that was one of the first early things I could hang my hat on as a songwriter and say, well, I can write something on this. I can imagine a melody. And so I did that and sang it, and I played slide guitar parts, and Tony and Bill played their parts. After we recorded it, Robert went, I guess another time, I wasn't in the studio, and recorded another soaring guitar thing over it. And that was the first version of it. And I kind of was a little disappointed. I said, wow, that's, you know, it kind of gets in the way of my slide thing, you know? But okay, fine. And we left it that way for a while. And then years later, Robert told me that I was right, and he removed it, and there's another version, that's the original one, without that part. Because what I'm saying that for is to demonstrate that he actually broke that rule, and I don't think he ever went that way again.
Adrian, how would you work on melody and lyric ideas with back then? Would you take rough mixes of the instrumental?
Once Robert and I had established something together,
Yep.
this is especially true of the interlocking guitar parts, then, as I said, if I thought I could write something, I'd say, okay, Ed, it's over to you. And then sometimes I would have a tape of it, but most times I would just sit and play and let melodies come to me and then eventually start writing words. And that was a long, hard process back then for me because of the complexity and everything.
Of the parts.
Well, it was also because for me, I had such a high, you know, King Crimson, the early King Crimson to me was like second only to the Beatles for me. So it was up here. So I really thought with this band, and I've got Tony Levin, and I got Bill Bruford and Robert Fripp, 3 very intelligent men. I want to be careful what I say. You know, I can't say, you know, I'm a lone rhinoceros. I can't do that with these guys. I can do that on my own, you know. So it was tough to write the stuff. And then I'd come back with Robert another day, and we'd say, okay, here's what I got. I got to move this up here now. And sometimes I'd actually write a whole other section that wasn't with Robert. Three of a Perfect Pair, I put in the dun 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 dun, and I thought of it as like a 7/8 version of a Motown song. 1, 1, 2 minutes, it's a friendly. I heard Diana Ross was, keep it complicated, complicated. That's what I heard. Of course, it didn't sound like that. In the end, thank God, it wasn't meant to be that.
Once you guys decided that it was going to be called King Crimson, it was going to be did you change anything? Did you change your approach to writing your parts or writing the record?
No, it was just a different name. You know, managers probably had an easier time booking our tour, our next tour. I don't really remember much about the change.
I think it did change a lot for them. But the only thing it changed for me at least was, wow, now I'm in King Crimson. You know, this is like, whew. I would have never thought that happened, that I'd wake up one day and be in King Crimson. It raised the bar, I suppose.
We didn't do that many shows. How many shows do you think we did?
We
as
didn't do
Discipline?
hardly any. we were talking about this the other day, yesterday, but that when we first went out and tried we were still disciplined.
Yeah.
We played a show in Holland, and we only had like 40 minutes worth of material. And they really got mad. The audience got really upset because first of all, they had made them wait 45 minutes to get in, and they searched everybody for cameras and stuff. And by the time we played, they were like, and then we couldn't play enough. So we had to go back out and play a couple more of the same songs. Tony said that was at the point where Robert had said up to that point, no, we're not touching the old material. This is a new band. But after,
and no encores.
And
at
no
that time, there was a
encores.
plan to never do an encore.
That was when he allowed us to start playing Red and Lark's Tongue. And that helped. So, because we only had one record's worth of material, you
It's
know.
always an issue when you have the first record.
And that's why we kind of hurried up to get the second record going too.
Now, did you tour more after the second record? Did you play more? Because there was a 2-year gap until the third record.
I think we went and played a lot after that, yeah. There was kind of, in the band, there was kind of a half year on, half year off way of working. But it really didn't work because the King Crimson side would, you know, the tours would get a little longer, which was great. I mean, we did a lot of stuff.
What was the philosophy of recording and being an artist, let's say 1980 or the 70s, 80s, and how often you had releases? Was that just a thing that you were kind of expected to make records? I mean, Frank made him how many records?
Well over 100 have been released.
Yeah.
Well, Robert had he had a plan. It was called the incline to 81, the drive to 84, I believe, something like that.
Okay.
And I said, well, what does that mean? Naturally. And he said, it means we'll go and do 3 world tours, and put out 3 records. And that will go from 81 through 84. And that's what we did.
Steve, did you think when you're making your own solo records and in the different groups that you played in, it was very common to make a record every year?
Well, I never really got pulled into that kind of a cycle because I was always more independent, and I just like tinkering, especially once technology started to change that allowed you to get into the notes, like you can start digitally dissecting stuff. I think that a band like Crimson was able to do that because, well, first of all, Robert envisioned it. So that's why, and his vision is always, he's very confident in it, and he just moves forward. And same as Frank.
Yeah.
One of the things about Crimson is, and making records like that, is it was a band.
Right.
You know what I mean? It was a band. There was no overdubbing. It was expensive to go into the studio.
Yeah.
And they knew what they wanted. Also, in that time period, a lot of rock bands did that because labels that had records that were successful wanted more. That the contracts were for 8 records, and that you had to deliver one a year. It was like that. But I think with the advent of technology and also the influx of more musicians that could make records in their, kitchen,
right,
that sound great on a laptop.
Yeah.
You don't have to spend thousands of, hundreds of whatever, making videos and records. There's a lot more people offering content. But also there's a lot more ability to tinker about.
Yeah.
It's how many bands, you talk to a lot of bands.
Yeah.
How many of them say, we wrote the song, we rehearsed it, and we recorded it.
And we put it out.
And we put it out.
That day.
There's a lot of, there's a whole, and plus.
See, the difference between the end of 84 and the time you're talking about, which is, considerable, it's almost a decade before people could finally make a home studio, and you could make records whenever you want and take your time, because you weren't looking at a clock and you weren't paying an engineer and then all these other things. So that's why I think King Crimson, I believe that Robert made an agreement with Warner Brothers, I think it was Warner Brothers, to do 3 albums in 3 years. We never signed a contract. Robert signed it.
Interesting.
I was never even asked to, I never saw anything, but I gradually realized, oh, this is what this plan is, you know? It's Robert's vision, 3 years, 3 world tours, and then break up.
Yeah. So I have a question for you. One of the things I was thinking also is the world wasn't as open.
Oh, no.
You know, like I just finished a tour, my Inviolate tour, 194 shows in 51 countries. So you could not do that in the 80s. You know, you couldn't go to
You can't
the
do that
Pac
now, my
Rim
man.
I can't do that now.
and I love it. And but you had America, and then if you were lucky, you can get to Europe.
Yep.
And I watched as things like Eastern Europe opened up. I was one of the early ones to get there because I just kept bugging my agent. I want to go to Poland. I want to go, you know, and they're like, nobody goes there. You know, I'm like, well, I want to go. And as soon as the wall came down, I started going. And Australia, it was very difficult to get to because of all the expense.
Yeah.
And South America, nobody went to South America. Russia, well, nobody's going there now, but I remember when it opened. I started going to Russia in the mid-'90s and China. So for me to do a touring cycle, that's almost 2 years.
Yeah.
So I never really, and I like that.
You like to play live.
I love to play live. I love touring. I love different cultures. I love going to just everything about touring. So I can't do a record, you know, boom, 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 you know. But that is the pattern. A record, tour, record, tour. But the tours used to be, you could do America, maybe Europe also. And that's even for big bands.
So that's probably why people released more records back then too, because you didn't have as many places to go and your tours weren't as long.
And you actually made money on them.
And
Yeah.
So
You don't
where
get
did you guys,
anything from
when you would go
albums
internationally,
We went through Europe and we went to, I love this, we went to Japan 3
Really?
times, right off the bat, once every year. America, of course. I don't know that we ever went to Australia.
No, not that I remember.
Interesting.
I went many times after that, but we never went as King Crimson.
In Argentina, we were big, but that was the 90s before
That
we
was
went
the
to
90s,
Argentina?
yeah. We went to, that's when we started going to South America and other far-reaching places. But we also never went to Russia until 2002, I think it was. And when we went there, that was a different King Crimson lineup. But when we went there, we had no idea that all those years, King Crimson was hugely popular in Russia. We never made a penny. We never saw any accounting of everything. It was all bootlegged.
Yeah.
So we went there and we got off the plane, and instead of taking us to the hotel, they took us right to something like this with 50 cameras and 50 journalists,
Amazing.
and they're all, and Robert didn't go. So guess what the interview was about? Where's Robert? What does Robert think? And we were all like, gee, okay.
Can I ask you guys about the recording process back then? You do a take. Does everybody go back to the control room and listen?
I think we all mostly went in the studio and listened to it on the great monitors, not headphones.
Okay, and people would say what?
If you were doing multiple takes, which we rarely did, you might say, I actually preferred the previous one, or something like that.
Yeah.
Or you might talk about, well, could I get a little more of this, tom-tom sound here?
That's what I remember.
Yeah.
My job was to say, can I have a little more bass? Can I hear a little more bass? And then everybody takes a turn, and then it's just louder.
Yeah.
It's the same mix.
Everybody's louder.
everybody's louder than everybody else?
Inevitable.
I'm joking because it's hard without a producer to make the final decisions, but we did okay with it.
Yeah.
And sometimes there was a sort of a producer, but we did okay.
Well, the
at
first
deciding.
record we had Rhett Davies.
Yeah.
So we did actually have a producer. The second one, I think we had a guy too, but not the third one.
Well, quick band decisions are always hard about artistic decisions and mixes.
And would you guys ever edit takes together? Would you say, oh, I like the bridge on this, and edit the two mix
I don't
of
remember
things?
I don't remember that ever
These are
happening.
really all
Live
takes.
They were
On all three
they
of
were
these
supposed
records.
to be that
In
way.
my memory, it was.
It was
That's
a
amazing.
kind of a
amazing.
hard rule.
It really is amazing.
I think vocals would come later. I seem to remember Sambuca.
Sam, I met him, yes, many times.
Yeah, Sam would come in and do a vocal.
Sam
and you would do the background vocals also, and maybe I would come in the morning the next day and redo the background vocal or be unable to do it and leave yours on it.
Well, you're remembering more than I am about that
But
part.
would it be a band decision if somebody said, "Oh, my part was really sucked on there. Can we redo it?" Or
we would redo it, of course.
You'd redo it.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, you could, but we were well rehearsed, you know. I mean,
Yeah.
one of the things we suffered through was rehearsals in some of the lamest places in the world. We rehearsed in an old, I don't know, 12th century barn, a stone barn, and we wrote, it was freezing, and we were writing Sheltering Sky, and the only thing I could play was do 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 do. I couldn't get my fingers to do anything else. So
An uninsulated
Divine
place in
intervention.
England.
we would play,
Dorset.
you know, they would put us, I believe, I'm not sure who we is, but I think they would put us in positions where we had to just suffer and come through with something, you know.
It was worth it.
But it was definitely worth it, yeah.
how do you see, today's, as far as social media, for example, how people connect with music through these? This is really for all of you guys through these social media apps.
Well, we get to watch the Rick Beato show.
Well, I don't mean that. I'm think of things like short form content, TikTok, Instagram, YouTube Shorts, things like that. What do you guys think about that related to what you guys are going to do here? Like, how does that factor into any of this?
It does now.
Not for me, but I really let other people deal with that part of it, honestly.
I'm with him.
Yeah.
We're a team on that.
It's a great marketing tool. It gets the message to everybody. I mean, that needs to hear it. Like, for instance, we thought that since we had the tour and there was one venue that requested to promote it because it was part of their season, and they would bury it because we hadn't made the announcement yet. And we're like, people are like, oh, okay. That nobody will see it. 2 hours after this, casino posted it in the bottom of their list, I'm getting inundated with people that know that it's happening. So that's one way. There's no secrets at sea.
Yeah.
When from the time you get off your bus, you're public knowledge. So buyer beware, but there's great advantages too.
And some disadvantages, but yeah, it's the way the world works in music now, whether you want to be a part of it or not. I kind of fought it for a while, and my booking agent kept saying, you need to get on Facebook. So I finally got on Facebook, and I really started enjoying I write back with my fans, back and forth, and I'm one of the guys who does that. I don't think a lot of people do, and I enjoy that. Then we started doing band camps, and now we have lots of friends who have seen us at this camp for 13 years now. Wow. And, and that played into it too. So it's become, for me now, a community, but it's in this other world. You can't touch it or anything, but I do really like interacting with the fans. So I try to feed them stories about the past or guitar information, but mainly it's used as a tool to let them know what's going on. And once I did that, I noticed with my own solo shows, people started turning out more, so it did work.
And what do you guys think about people recording at shows?
Well, there was a period in the beginning where, you become a product of your conditioning.
Yeah.
So it was conditioned into me that you just don't do that. Don't allow it. And with very strict policies. We used to send people out during the shows to find anybody with one of those big giant VHS. But after a while, it really depends on how you choose to look at it.
Yeah.
So the way I choose to look at it is, it's great because now it may not sound great when people are at the concerts, and then they post it, but there are a lot of people that those little concert clicks, they're very meaningful to.
Yes.
And they get out there and, I think that they're great. They help. it would be nice if they sounded good.
Yeah.
But there's even a charm in the way that they don't sound good, sometimes. So.
Go ahead, sorry.
Oh no, I was just saying. So you just you choose how you want to feel, and then you decide the story attached to it.
What I find interesting about it is back in the 80s, you had to make videos to get any any friction at all. You had to spend a lot of money on those videos. And someone at MTV decided whether or not they'll ever see the light of day. Don't know who that was, but they really totally decided whether you were going to make it or you were not going to make it. And, even King Crimson, which we didn't really truly want to do that much, had to do that. But now it's all there. And what I find interesting is everyone's putting up stuff, so everything kind of looks the same. You don't spend $50,000 for a video anymore. It's just, somebody's doing it on their own little phone. And so it's taken the level of production and cost out of it.
I mean, because it doesn't quite need to be, it doesn't need to be perfect.
It does for things like what we're doing here, but I'm talking about now, if I wanted to talk to my fans or I want to put up a demo I was just making yesterday, I can do it. It's accepted. And I don't have to hire anyone to help me do it.
I see things with Danny where people ask him questions and they put up shorts, and there's thousands and thousands of things where somebody's asking you a question and they're just filming you with their phone and you're gracious and answering the question.
Yeah, it doesn't really bug me. I figure it all just feeds into the fire, and the more the merrier.
It generates interest.
So I mean, our guitar player has a different view, and
Adam does
he's
not.
like, he thinks there's taking from us or something, instead of looking at it like spreading the gospel. I'd rather look at it that way. It's just better for my well-being, my brain. I don't want to.
Also, we've been around a long time, and when we were starting, people would record it and bootleg it and sell that.
Yeah.
Really was in the same market as your own release. So they were really stealing your stuff, and things have changed. Like so much in the music world and the music industry, we've had to adjust our thinking for the changing reality of the way things will go.
It used to be that you would go out and try new material to see how it worked live, like you were talking about. But now, in a way, you've given away that, and you create a demand for that music, and then if you change it, people have already listened to it a number of times, and they already know what it is, and they've leaked these ideas or whatever it is.
Well, your idea of testing then has to change.
Right.
Regardless of what it is or how it's bootlegged or whatever it is, the power behind it is in the inspiration of the creator. If the creator is connected, the person that's doing it, then it'll just have the impact that you want. I mean, a good example is those early Tool videos, because we're talking about very different time period.
Yes.
Between then and now.
Yeah.
But the creativity was rich. It was very rich. So it doesn't matter if something like that came out today, done simply or whatever, or back then through the process of, as Adrian was talking, the MTV regulations and all that, the bottom line is, how good is it? How is it affecting? How powerful is it?
The playing field is a bit leveled by all of this. If you think about it, if you will do the work to get to the audience, your audience will be there. It doesn't mean there'll be billions of them. Because there's so much content out there. It can't be that, because there's so many things to look at and hear. It's hard to decide when and how to do that. I don't spend a lot of time on it personally, other than interacting with my fans, because I get lost in it. And then an hour goes by and I think, wow, I should be doing something, right?
Okay, so you guys are all from different places. Long Island, right? You're from Kentucky. You're from Kansas. You're from Boston. Does that play into anything, into the way that you think about music?
I think not, but I think we've all, I won't speak for everyone else, but we musicians share the wonder and the joy of making music with people from around the planet, whom we may, in my case, may not speak the same language, And the music isn't always simple and go down easy, but there's some magic to that, and it doesn't really matter where the person came from. At least that's my experience.
Music is a language. It's always amazed me. You can go to Poland where they may not even speak a word, and yet they enjoy it exactly the same, and somehow they get it, what you're trying to give to them, because music is that way. It transcends all other things. So
yeah, I think there was a period of time where locational music played a big role in the culture, because this guy here plays this and he lives in our town, and we don't have the radio, we don't have records, you know. But I think by the time all of us were even teenagers, you know, you knew who King Crimson was. You knew who, for me, I knew who Led Zeppelin was. All my friends, I knew who Queen. I knew then some of the great fusion stuff. So it was all of this music. I don't know how much it mattered. How much? I think Tony's correct. I don't really think it mattered tremendously that we're all from different locations in the United States. Now, food might be different, but the kind of music we were exposed to and had, I don't think it was very far apart.
however, in the Crimson Band that we're talking about, 1981, I think it did really inform the music, because you had two Englishmen and
Oh,
two
yeah, that's a different
Americans.
story.
That
was what I'm getting at.
combination was really unique. Just like when the Beatles came out, there was a total uniqueness to for us Americans, because they didn't even sound the same as us. But when we were putting together things as King Crimson back then, it was really interesting. Bill Bruford's viewpoint, Robert's, the input and ours to them was very unique, because they kind of didn't understand. We just like to play. They wanted to talk about the music a lot. We just, well, let's play it. That's the American way, and Bill would always joke about that. The Americans just want to play. And but I think there was something to that. To me, I felt, I guess personally for me, I felt like elevated a little bit to be playing with two brilliant English people, as well as one of the greatest bass players in the world. But like Tony said, I mean, all of us have played a lot of music with a lot of different people, and I've played with a lot of nationalities, and been, just like Tony has, he's probably done it more than any of us. Tony probably has played with more people than any of us, wouldn't you say? For sure.
I've played with a lot of players who were a lot better than me, and it's kind of how you learn to try to up your game, even if you can't do it right away.
That's right.
Yeah.
If you want
Maybe
to be
I'll
a better tennis player, play a better tennis player.
Yeah.
Well, I'm really excited about this, about your new project here, and I can't wait to see you guys play. It's going to be announced here in a few weeks, and I saw the list of tour dates ahead of time, and I'm really excited. Thank you guys for spending time with me today.
Thank you for having us on this.
It's been awesome.
Very helpful. Thank you.
You're doing great stuff, Rick.
You know, we share a love of Rochester, and a lot of my musical training, most of it came from there, and it occupies a special place in our musical history. So I feel like we have that in common, and thanks for reminding me.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thanks,
Great
guys.
to be on your show. Thanks.
Thanks, guys.